It's now 2 years since the collapse of Lehman Brothers signified the start of the global credit crunch. If you're an estate agent, you'd probably say things have not got much better. If you're a car salesman, they're saying, what's the problem? What happens if you're the Minister of Finance, Prof Gordhan? Where are South Africa's tax collections? And how's it all going? We had Maria Ramos running National Treasury and Trevor Manuel as Minister of Finance, and they ran it like a good Scottish family. You never borrow. You only spend what you collect. And that situation endured for the 3 years up to 2008. Then, by 2009, Ramos had moved on, and Manuel carried on his own, incurring small deficits, about 36 billion rand a year. By budget 2010, we realized that we were in a more difficult time because of the global credit crunch, and they budgeted a national deficit of some 110 billion rand. What was happening? Well, at the time, in 2009, we said to Manuel, are we in recession? He said, no. A recession is 2 consecutive periods of negative real growth. And that only happened in South Africa by June 2009. And when we asked Manuel about it, we said, well, what do we do now? He said, don't ask me. I'm no longer Minister of Finance. The problem is now Prof Gordhan's. Prof Gordhan then took the problem and said, right, into the 2010 actual figures, I've got a disaster. It's not a 110 billion rand deficit, it's a deficit of 190 odd billion. He said, well, what am I going to do now? And instead of panicking, he got damn clever. In February 2009, we already saw the first signs of recovery from the global credit crunch. And at that point, Prof Gordhan said, don't panic. This thing might fix itself. So he set a budget where he said, right, budget for 2011 is if we can be just about as bad as 2010, this thing might just fix itself. And so he budgeted about 185 billion rand deficit. And he got it absolutely right. Because the global credit crunch only lasted 3 consecutive quarters in South Africa, and it has been replaced ever since by positive real growth. Going forward like this, we get, right, lovely figures, 196 actual deficit in 2010, budget 183 for 2011, achieve 142 for 2011, 41 billion better than target. That's not too bad going, hey? And then we budget going forward from that we will keep the deficit at around about 100 to 150 billion rand right through till 2014. Reducing our deficit as a percentage of GDP down to about 4%. And that was the call back in February 2011. When we look at this, we say, well, Prof Gordhan's having a great run because his position in February was that the growth rates were hanging around about 2%. And since then, we have seen that things have got a lot better, and the national budget that was for 2011-2012, which was based on a 3.4% growth rate, well, the growth rate is now sitting at 4.8%. What does this mean in tax collections? One of the problems is that we've got the individual taxpayer paying far too much, 34% of the total pie, and that corporate tax collections have dropped to about 22% of the total pie. The individual picking up the can again with VAT, and then with most of the customs and excise duty, and in one way or other they're paying the fuel duties. If one looks at the remaining taxes, they are very small in the total scheme of things. And what one has to say is, looking at all of this together, we have a situation that huge pressure has been put on the individual taxpayer. But overall, the economy is looking great. We went in a pretty disastrous situation on fuel last year, from mid-2010 with a rand price of a barrel of crude being just under 600, to by March of 2011, we've gone over 800. Fortunately, that has recovered now back to about 750 rands per barrel. So the worst of the crisis, hopefully, is behind us, not because of a reduction in oil prices, but rather because of strong rand. The current account has made the biggest recovery since Lazarus. Remember when Tito Mboweni was sweating about it back in 2008? Well, now we've got a position with the current account that is showing the best level since 2003, 2004. That's great. And that has translated in interest rates reducing from the high level of 2008 of 15% down to about 9% today. Consumer confidence levels dropped. Then they recovered, and now they've fallen off a bit as the consumer comes to the reality that we are not coming back from the global credit crunch in a 4x4 with TV screens in the back seats. All of this, the tax collections position should be okay, but for one thing, the number of South Africans. There are 50 million South Africans. What do they look like? There are 1.4 million disabled. There are 2 million AIDS orphans. There are 10 million children on child grants with an extra 100,000 joining their ranks every month. There are 8 million kids not on child grants. There are 2 million old age pensioners. There are 4 million unemployed. There are 10 million economically inactive. That makes up for 75% of the population, and we haven't got a cent of tax yet. And the big thing that we've got at the moment is that the unemployed and the economically inactive have no form of social security, and that is the next challenge that is facing the new South Africa. To pay for that, we have got 9 million South Africans who are employed, but who are below tax threshold, so they're paying no tax. And a tax base of about 3.3 million South Africans who earn between 50 and 500,000 per annum and pay about 24% of South Africa's total taxes. They sit there. And the fat cats of South Africa, they are merely 150,000 of them who sit in the bracket of above 500,000 rands income per annum. When one looks at where is the additional income coming from to pay for this in the future, we say take the pie that we've got now and say what can they mine further? Individuals are already paying too much in the form of 34% of the total pie. The next one down the track is VAT, and the long time ago Minister of Finance, Baron du Plessis, will tell you that you can't mine that further than 14% without a national strike. Corporate taxes are already substantially under pressure. That leaves you with customs and excise, not a lot that can be collected there without contributing into inflation, or more fuel levy, not very likely with the implementation of toll road taxes, STC being halved by the implementation of dividend tax, and then we're left with skills levy already fully mined. Transfer duty can't really go up much more because nobody's buying second-hand houses. Donations tax is insignificant, and so are the rest, leaving you with one tax. And that is electricity tax, the first environmental tax that we get in South Africa. And this is a very important lesson going forward, because what we look at is the story behind electricity tax implementation. Go back to 2008 and the electricity crisis that occurred in the early part of 2008. We get to January and suddenly we get load shedding. A message to the then Minister of Finance, Trevor Manuel, increase the allocation to Eskom or we'll put the lights out. So he did. And the lights came back on. Not only because of the money, but because of the global credit crunch, electricity consumption in South Africa plummeted. What we are looking at now today is that electricity consumption has increased, but it's nowhere near as high as it was at its height in 2007. That's in spite of the World Cup and everything else. But the important message that they've got from it is that they've seen what they can do with an environmental tax. Firstly, it's reduced electricity consumption, and that's good for the environment and everything else. That's great. But secondly, instead of just stiffing the problem to the taxpayer and saying the 60 billion that we gave Eskom in 2008, that's got to be paid by the taxpayer, we made the taxpayer pay it back. And they saw that they've won on both, and they experienced that they can win on both sides. One, you can fix the environment, and two, you can get extra revenues. So if you're looking for extra revenues, carbon emission tax are the way to go. And we can be expecting a lot more of that in the future.